Welcome to Story Horizon. I'm the storyteller, here to help you drift into a peaceful sleep tonight. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more soothing stories. And let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Now, settle in, take a deep breath, and let yourself relax. Let's begin our journey. Story 1. It was an ordinary Tuesday when I found the photograph. I was doing my rounds as usual, delivering mail through a quiet, familiar neighborhood. The sun had just come up, casting a soft golden light across the street, and everything felt routine. The same driveways, the same dogs barking behind the same fences. But as I was walking up to one of the houses, I noticed something fluttering on the ground near the mailbox. It was a small, weathered photograph, half buried in the grass, as if it had been dropped and forgotten. I picked it up, brushing the dirt off, and looked closer. The photo was faded, edges worn from time, but I could still make out the faces. It was of a young couple, smiling wide, standing in front of an old car. There was something about their expressions, something so alive and hopeful, that it struck me. The man had his arm around the woman's shoulder, his other hand holding up a set of keys, as if they'd just bought the car, or maybe even a house. You could almost feel their excitement coming through, like they were on the edge of a new beginning. I turned the photo over, and on the back, in neat handwriting, was a date from nearly 40 years ago and words, "First day of forever." I looked back at the house, wondering if the photo belonged to someone who lived there. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a lost picture. It was a piece of someone's story, someone's history, and something about the joy in their faces made me want to see that it got back to where it belonged. When I knocked on the door, an older woman answered, her face lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from a lifetime of laughter and love. She looked surprised to see me standing there, especially with the photograph in hand. "Excuse me, ma'am," I started, holding out the photo. "I found this near your mailbox and thought it might belong to you." She took it carefully, her eyes widening as she looked down at the image. A soft gasp escaped her, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh, my goodness," she whispered, tracing a finger over the faces in the picture. "I thought I'd lost this years ago." Her reaction surprised me, and I found myself wanting to know more. "It must be a special memory," I said gently. She nodded, her gaze distant, as if she were looking back through the years. "That's me and my husband, Jack," she said, a faint smile on her lips. "That was the day we bought our first house together. We were so young, didn't have a clue what we were doing, but we were happy." She paused, and I could see the memories flooding back, like they were just waiting for her to find them again. "Jack passed away a few years ago," she continued, her voice quiet but steady. "I thought this photo was gone for good, like so many little things you lose along the way. But here it is. It's like he sent me a little hello." The way she spoke, with a mix of sorrow and warmth, made me realize how much that one moment had meant to her, how it was more than just a photo. It was a connection, a reminder of all they'd built together. She looked up at me, her eyes glistening. "Thank you. Really? You have no idea what this means to me." I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of purpose I hadn't expected to find in the middle of my route. "I'm glad I could bring it back to you," I said, and I meant it. As I walked back to my truck, I glanced back at her. She was still standing there, holding the photo close to her heart, a soft smile on her face. It struck me then how these little things, the ones we often overlook or think are gone forever, can hold so much meaning. They're like anchors, grounding us in who we are, where we've been, and the people we've loved. I finished my route that day with a different perspective, thinking about the countless letters and packages I delivered, each one a small part of someone's life, carrying memories, stories, moments of connection. I realized that, in my own small way, I was part of that web of memories, of people and places linked by love, loss, and hope. And every now and then, when I'm out on my rounds, I find myself thinking of the woman in her photo, of that joyful young couple on the first day of forever. It reminds me that even in the ordinary routine of life, there are little miracles waiting to be found, tiny treasures left for us to rediscover. Sometimes I think about that day and wonder if, one day, I'll stumble upon another memory waiting to be returned, another chance to give someone back a piece of their story. And somehow, knowing that makes every day feel just a little bit more meaningful. Story 2. It was a cold, quiet evening in the plaza, the kind of night when most people hurried home to escape the chill. But as I walked through, hands stuffed in my pockets, I heard something that made me stop, a voice, clear and calm, reciting poetry into the empty square. I looked around, surprised, and then I saw him, an old man, standing under one of the lampposts, book in hand, his voice rising and falling like the gentle rhythm of waves. He was thin, with a face etched by years, and wore a tattered coat that looked like it had weathered decades of winters. But there was something magnetic about him, something in the way he stood there, alone yet unbothered by the emptiness around him, as if he were speaking to an audience only he could see. I took a few steps closer, drawn in by his voice. He was reciting a poem, something melancholy and beautiful, words filled with lost love, and a kind of longing that struck me deeply. I wasn't usually one for poetry, but there was something about the way he spoke, his voice trembling on certain lines, softening on others, that made me feel as though I were listening to someone's deepest secrets. When he finished, he closed the book and looked up, almost startled to see me standing there. He gave me a small, knowing smile and nodded, as if he'd been expecting me all along. "Cold night to be out reading poetry," I said, feeling oddly shy. He shrugged, tucking the book under his arm. "Sometimes the words feel heavier when there's no one around to hear them. But then, maybe someone will listen." He paused, looking at me with eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 stories. "Do you like poetry?" I laughed, feeling a little embarrassed. "Honestly, I don't know much about it. But the way you read, it feels different, like it matters." He chuckled softly, his gaze drifting back to the plaza. "That's because it does matter. Words are like footprints, you know. Even when there's no one around to see them, they still leave a mark. And sometimes, they find the person they're meant to reach." For a moment, we stood in silence, the only sound the rustling of leaves and the soft hum of distant traffic. Then he opened the book again, flipping through the pages until he found what he was looking for. "Here," he said, his voice low and reverent. "I want you to hear this one." He began to read, his voice filling the empty square once more. This time, the poem was about the sea, a longing to return to places left behind, the ache of missing something that's just out of reach. As he read, I felt an unexpected tug at my heart, like the words were meant for me, like he was saying something I hadn't been able to put into words myself. When he finished, he looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "Sometimes, we carry things we don't know how to set down," he murmured. "That's what poetry is for. It helps you put down what's too heavy to hold." I swallowed, feeling a lump in my throat that I couldn't quite explain. I wanted to tell him that I understood, that I, too, was carrying things I didn't know how to release, but I couldn't find the words. He smiled, as if he could read my mind. "Keep that with you," he said, patting the cover of the book. "Words have a way of helping us find ourselves." He handed me a slip of paper with a few lines scribbled on it, his handwriting shaky but careful. It read, "When you find the right words, they'll carry you home." Before I could thank him, he nodded, turning to leave. his figure disappearing into the shadows at the edge of the plaza. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the paper in my hand, feeling the weight of the words he'd given me. I went back to that plaza every week after that, hoping to see him again, to hear more of his poetry, to learn what else he had to say about the things we carry and the words we leave behind. But he never returned, and no one else seemed to know who he was. But I kept that slip of paper, those words he'd written, tucked away in my wallet like a talisman. And on nights when I felt lost, when the world felt too heavy or too big, I'd pull it out and read it, letting his words guide me back to myself. In the end, I think he was right. Words really do leave footprints, and some of them are meant just for us. And even though I never saw the poet of the plaza again, his words are still with me, helping me find my way, long after that cold, quiet night. Story 3. It was one of those rare nights when everything seemed to stand still. I'd been traveling all day, tired and eager to get home, but an unexpected storm had forced the bus to pull over at a small, out-of-the-way rest stop. The rain poured down in sheets, drumming against the roof, and the lightning lit up the sky in quick, bright flashes. There were only a few of us on the bus, and we filed into the dimly lit rest stop, seeking warmth and shelter. Inside, there was a row of tired vending machines, a few plastic chairs, and a single coffee machine that looked like it hadn't been serviced in years. I grabbed a cup of coffee, too tired to care that it tasted faintly of burnt plastic, and found a seat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. That's when I noticed her, a woman around my age, sitting alone, her hands wrapped around her own coffee cup as if it were a lifeline. She looked as weary as I felt, her eyes distant, as if she were a million miles away. Something about her expression struck me, a mixture of sadness and quiet determination that mirrored how I'd been feeling lately, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Without really thinking about it, I found myself walking over to her. "Mind if I sit here?" I asked, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. She looked up, surprised, but nodded. "Sure," she said softly, offering a small smile. "Not like we're going anywhere anytime soon." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us sipping our coffee and watching the storm rage outside. Finally, she broke the silence. "Long day?" she asked, her voice gentle. I nodded, chuckling. "Long week, actually. Feels like I've been on the road forever." She nodded, a look of understanding crossing her face. "I know the feeling." We exchanged small talk at first, the kind of surface-level conversation that fills the gaps between strangers. But as the minutes passed, I felt a strange sense of comfort with her, like we were two old friends who'd somehow found each other again. Eventually, she opened up. "I'm heading back home," she said, her voice quieter now. "I left a few years ago, thinking I'd find something better out there. But now, I'm not so sure." There was a vulnerability in her words, a hesitation that told me she hadn't said this out loud before. I nodded, feeling the weight of her confession, recognizing a piece of myself in it. "I know what you mean," I replied. "I left home too, hoping to chase down some big dreams. But lately, I've been wondering if I left more behind than I gained." She looked at me, her eyes softening, as if she understood exactly what I meant. We talked about the places we'd been, the people we'd met, and the dreams we'd chased across countless miles. We shared stories of late nights in strange cities, of quiet mornings in rented apartments, of friendships that had come and gone. And through it all, there was a common thread, a longing for something steady, something real, something that felt like home. At some point, the storm outside began to calm, the rain easing into a gentle drizzle. But we didn't move, lost in the quiet understanding we'd found in each other's words. It was strange, really, two strangers, sitting together in a rundown rest stop, sharing pieces of ourselves that we'd never shared with anyone else. "I guess we're both travelers," she said, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "But maybe we're not just looking for a place. Maybe we're looking for a way to feel settled, no matter where we are." Her words resonated with me, settling into a place I hadn't realized was empty. "Maybe that's it," I murmured, more to myself than to her. "Maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's something we carry with us, something we find in moments like this." She nodded, and for a long moment, we just sat there, letting the silence speak for us. The rest of the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the quiet warmth between us. Eventually, the bus driver came in, announcing that the storm had passed and we'd be on the road again soon. We both stood, gathering our things, a strange reluctance hanging in the air. As we walked back to the bus, she looked over at me, her eyes thoughtful. "I don't know where life's going to take me," she said softly. "But tonight felt like a part of the journey I needed." I smiled, nodding. "Same here. It's funny. Sometimes the people we meet along the way make more of a difference than the destination itself." We boarded the bus, taking our seats on opposite sides. But every now and then, I'd catch her glance over at me, a small smile on her face, as if we were sharing some quiet secret. When we finally reached her stop, she turned to me one last time, her eyes bright with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, "for listening." And with that, she was gone, disappearing into the early morning mist, leaving me with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. To this day, I think about her sometimes, about that stormy night, that rundown rest stop, and the strange, unexpected connection we found in the middle of nowhere. It reminded me that, no matter where we're headed, it's the people we meet on the road who make the journey worth taking. Story 4. The rain had started that afternoon as a gentle drizzle, the kind that barely makes a sound but fills the air with the comforting scent of damp earth and fresh leaves. I was on my way home, umbrella in hand, when I took a wrong turn down an unfamiliar street. There it was, tucked into the corner of a narrow alleyway, a modest, dimly lit bookstore with a sign that read the Libreria Acogedora in faded gold letters. The moment I stepped inside, the world outside seemed to disappear. The warmth of the shop enveloped me, a quiet refuge from the wet chill outside. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with books of every size, color, and age. The air smelled of old paper, vanilla, and something subtly floral, as though the place itself had absorbed the tales of romance, adventure, and mystery contained within those pages. An elderly man sat behind the counter, looking up from a leather-bound novel as I entered. He gave a soft nod, as if he was welcoming an old friend, and returned to his reading. I wandered through the aisles, each step muffled by the thick, patterned rug underfoot. There were books on everything: history, poetry, science, tales of far-off lands, and works by authors I'd never heard of. Each cover seemed to whisper its own story, inviting me to pick it up and dive into a new world. After a while, I found myself in a cozy corner by a large, fogged-up window. A small table sat there, holding a vase of fresh lavender and an old lamp casting a soft, golden light. I settled into a worn armchair, pulled a book off a nearby shelf, and began to read. Time slipped away, each turn of the page pulling me deeper into the story as the rain drummed gently against the window. Eventually, the old man approached, holding a cup of steaming tea. "It's chamomile," he said with a gentle smile, setting it down on the table beside me. "It goes well with the rain." I thanked him, and he nodded before retreating back to his place behind the counter, leaving me to the quiet company of words and warmth. Hours passed unnoticed. Outside, the rain continued to fall, But inside the Libreria Acogedora, there was only peace, a haven from the rush of the world. By the time I left, it was dark outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets gleaming under the streetlights. I took one last look back at the little shop, its light glowing softly through the window, a beacon of calm in the city's quiet. As I walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped out of a dream. Story 5. It was one of those unexpectedly wet days when the sky, heavy with clouds, seemed to hang so low it touched the tops of the trees. I was hiking along an old forest path, enjoying the peace of the woods, when I heard it, the unmistakable patter of rain, a soft whispering that began to grow louder, urging me to find cover. I was about to turn back when, through the misty drizzle, I noticed a faint light deeper in the forest. Curious, I ventured closer, and there it was, an old stone building, modest and unassuming, with ivy climbing its walls and warm light spilling from its windows. Above the wooden door, a small, painted sign read Hidden Cafe. It felt surreal, almost like stumbling upon a secret, something left behind just for the few who knew where to look. Inside, the cafe was a world of warmth and comfort, as if the rain couldn't reach us there. Wooden beams lined the ceiling, and the tables were small and mismatched, each one with a tiny vase holding wildflowers. There were only a few people, each in their own quiet world, sipping coffee, reading, or gazing dreamily out the rain-speckled windows. A cheerful barista, seemingly unsurprised by my rain-soaked state, welcomed me with a smile. "Take your time," she said, as if this place was meant for slow moments. I ordered a latte and found a cozy corner with a view of the rain-drenched trees. Outside, the forest was alive with the sound of raindrops bouncing off leaves, creating a rhythmic melody that seemed to echo inside. The air was fragrant with the scent of coffee, mingling with a hint of cinnamon and something herbal, maybe rosemary from the sprig placed in a small vase at my table. The barista brought my coffee, accompanied by a small plate of homemade shortbread. "This one's on the house," she said, winking. "Perfect for a rainy day." The first sip of that latte was rich, warm, and comforting, like an embrace. I sat back, letting the warmth soak in as the rain drummed gently against the roof. As I watched, the forest outside seemed to breathe with the rain, as if each drop brought the trees to life. Inside, everything felt timeless, suspended between the outside world and a sanctuary of stillness. The other patrons, too, were wrapped in their own calm. One person, seated across from me, was sketching in a notebook, drawing delicate outlines of leaves and branches. Another, an elderly man with a worn hat, stared out the window, a gentle smile on his face, as if he'd seen this rain 1,000 times. I stayed longer than I intended, each moment unfurling softly, like the mist outside. With every sip of coffee, every bite of shortbread, I felt myself sinking deeper into the serenity of the place. Hours slipped by unnoticed, each one quieter than the last. Finally, as the rain began to lighten, I finished my coffee and made my way to the door. The barista waved, and I returned the smile, grateful for the unexpected haven. Stepping back into the forest, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The cafe's warm glow receded slowly, hidden again among the trees, as if it had never been there at all. As I walked away, my footsteps blending with the softened drizzle, I felt as though I had stumbled upon something rare, a place that only reveals itself to those who truly listen. The memory of Hidden Cafe in the forest lingered, a small, cherished reminder that sometimes the most magical places are those you find by accident. Story 6. The rain had come out of nowhere, a sudden shower sweeping over the valley just as I reached the edge of the flower field. It was a place I hadn't visited in years, not since my husband had passed, but something had drawn me there that day, tugging at me like a quiet whisper, a nudge from the past. The field stretched out before me, a blanket of colors softened by the mist. Bright reds, purples, and yellows dotted the landscape, their petals heavy with raindrops, bending ever so slightly under the weight. This was our place, our sanctuary during the early days, where we'd come to walk, to talk, to escape the world. And though I'd avoided it since he'd been gone, that day I felt an odd pull to return, almost as if he were waiting for me. I moved slowly, the wet grass brushing against my ankles, each step carrying me deeper into a swirl of memories. I could almost see him beside me, his warm, steady hand holding mine, his laughter mixing with the rustling of the leaves. We used to call this place our little miracle, and in many ways, it had been. We'd shared our dreams here, our secrets, and even our silent worries, never knowing just how much time we'd have. A light drizzle turned into a steady rain, but I didn't mind. The water felt refreshing, like a gentle reminder that I was still here, that life was still moving, even if it felt different now. I kept walking, running my fingers over the petals as I passed, remembering how he'd pick flowers and tuck them behind my ear, laughing when I'd blush. Then, as I reached the heart of the field, I felt an odd sensation, a warmth cutting through the chill of the rain. I looked up, and there, just above me, a break appeared in the thick clouds, a sudden, unexpected patch of blue, like a window to the sky beyond. It was beautiful, breathtaking even, but there was something more to it. As I watched, a single beam of sunlight pierced through the gap, bathing the field in a soft, golden light. It illuminated the flowers around me, making them glow as if touched by some quiet, hidden magic. And there, standing in the middle of that circle of light, I felt an overwhelming sense of his presence, stronger than I'd ever felt it before. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the light sink in, and in that moment, I could almost feel his arms around me, his voice soft in my ear. "I'm here," it seemed to say, though there were no words, just a feeling, a knowing that went beyond anything I could explain. Tears blurred my vision as I opened my eyes, but I found myself smiling, a real smile, one I hadn't felt in a long time. Somehow, I knew that this was his way of letting me know he hadn't truly left. He was here, woven into the beauty of this place, in the petals, in the rain, in the light that had found me on a day when I needed it most. The sunbeam lingered for just a few minutes, but those minutes felt like a lifetime. I stayed still, breathing in the moment, the scent of rain and wildflowers filling the air. And then, as gently as it had come, the light faded, the clouds closing once more, the rain returning to its quiet patter. I stood there for a while longer, alone yet not alone, letting the calm wash over me. It was a strange, quiet miracle, something that didn't need explaining. I didn't need to understand it, to dissect it. I just needed to feel it, to let it fill the empty spaces inside me. As I turned to leave, I plucked a small, white daisy from the field, tucking it behind my ear as he used to do. I could almost hear his chuckle, see his warm smile, and I knew, in my heart, that I'd carry this moment with me forever. The field, our little sanctuary, had given me one last gift, a reminder that love didn't vanish with loss, that it lingered, like the scent of flowers after a rain, filling the world with quiet beauty, waiting to be found when we least expected it. With each step back toward the path, I felt lighter, a renewed sense of peace settling over me. It was as if he'd left me a part of himself in that beam of light, a simple but powerful reminder that I wasn't alone. And as I looked back over the field, glistening with rain and memory, I whispered a soft thank you to the open sky, feeling his presence one last time before the rain began to fall again, washing over the world in a gentle, healing embrace.